Hello chess friends, and welcome to Jozarov chess channel, and welcome to my series Producing Ideas in Chess. So this series is sort of an interactive chess course with me for my viewers, for my followers, and for those who are watching the series for the first time. In my previous video I always set up one particular position which you have to analyze for you at home, finding the best plan, finding some strategical ideas in the middle game, because I think middle game planning is one of the most important things that you have to solve, that you have to realize in your own games, because I still have problems by myself in order to find maybe the best plan. So in this series we are trying to improve our planning skills in the middle game. So last time we had this position, and as said, we are always answering to these 7 questions. So the 7 questions are always: what kind of pawn structure do we have, what advantages or disadvantages do I have in the position, which pieces need improvement, do we have a collision, should I search for tactics, where can I crack the opponent's position, can I create an outpost, and what's my opponent's main strategical idea. So I'll answer to all of these questions, and today we'll talk about this so-called positional exchange of the pieces in the middle game. So the game was played by Magnus Carlsen here with white pieces against Evgeny Tomashevsky with the black pieces. And for the question number 1, first, most of you have answered here that we have the so-called dynamic center, which is okay. It is true, but it's also not true. I'll explain it why. Because when we have this pawn structure like here in this position, I'll sorted this out, the importance of this pawn structure in the center. Although it's the dynamic center, because we have now the possibility to maybe trade off some pawns, or maybe to push here c4. But the more important thing here is that the outcome of the exchange of pawns is really important. So let's see now this possible exchange of these pawns. If black tries something like maybe c takes d4, then we have e takes d4, and we have now the so-called static center. So you see, black will need many moves in order to push this pawn forward, and it wouldn't be good, because in a potential trade of pawns, let's just imagine this pawn is also not on the board, black will continue the game with this isolated pawn, which is also always a weakness in the position. So that's why you see here although we have sort of a dynamic position, this position is really static, because again, we can simply, after trade of the pawns here, simply take, and we have now again the static center, and in the static center we should really search for outposts. This outpost, of course, will be on these squares, like on c5 and on e5. So that's why here, although it's the correct answer, most of you have answered here that really it was a dynamic center, but after a trade of the pawns, after a possible trade of pawns, or if black tries maybe something like c4, we have still a sort of a static position. And this is now really important, because in this position played by Magnus Carlsen realizes here that we have now again this so-called static center. So you see, again, we have now the position here in the center with these pawns on d4, d5. Anything can happen, of course. Black can choose here. If it takes c takes d4, again we will take e takes d4, and again the pawn structure will be really fixed. And one of my followers really answered very well to this question, and it was again this viewer unnamed channel. The unnamed channel wrote again, the center is somewhat fixed, but the c file can open up, which is also true, but also not true. If black tries here maybe to take, then if we capture with the e pawn, then the c file wouldn't be opened. That would be the problem. So you see, again, we have sort of a staticity in the game. The position is really static, and here we should really look for outposts and positional trades of pieces. So that's the most important thing. Let's now answer to these other questions. What advantages or disadvantages do I have? Here I don't think that white has sort of too much of an advantage here. We have really a good development. We have now the control of the e5 square, but also you see black can also try a knight on e4 outpost, so I think this would be sort of an equal position. Which pieces need improvement? I think all of the pieces here are on very nice squares. Maybe the knight from f3 could be improved on e5, but that's all possible because that is only possible if we get rid of these defenders of this e5 square. The defenders of the e5 square are the bishop and the knight on g6. So then we can create an outpost, because if you try to immediately create an outpost here, and that's the answer to question number 6, if we immediately try, then black can maybe try. If we take with the pawn, then here we would have maybe a weak pawn on e5. Still, black could have continued maybe here with d4 and really liberating the position for the light square bishop. So that's why here, as I said, we can search here for the outpost, and that's the main strategical idea here. But we have to get rid of this knight and the bishop on d6, the knight on g6 and the bishop on d6. So do we have a collision? Should I search for tactics? Okay, this is also kind of a tactic. This is a positional tactic. Here maybe just a simple trade off this knight on g6, and then after that the bishop, just in order to have a possible outpost on this e5 square. Where can I crack the opponent's position? So you see, because of this static position of the pawns in the center, we really cannot immediately crack the positions. Here we shouldn't really watch for some pawn moves, because if we play the move c4 after d takes c4, this would really liberate the diagonal for the bishop, and this bishop in black's position is the worst piece because it's blocked out by its own pawn. So that's why we are not allowing this light square bishop to come into the game. We are really want to play sort of a blockade against this bishop. So as said, while answering to all of these questions, you have to be familiar also with some things about the Night Outpost when your opponent has here 3 pawns. So let's see now here. We have now, if we play an outpost on e5, and you see your opponent hasn't moved so far, like here in this position, like here your opponent hasn't moved these pawns on f7, g7 and h7. Well, this outpost can always be challenged with the move f6. But whenever you weaken your opponent's pawn structure a little bit, when your opponent has maybe played the move g6, well, then after potential f6 move, you see we could really maybe try some tactics here with knight or bishop sacrifice on g6. The same thing here. If your opponent has weakened the pawn structure around the king with the move h6, then you see it's hard to kick away this knight with the move f6. So that's why here we could, after potential move f6, we could maybe put our knight here on a very, very annoying square on g6. The same thing if your opponent has maybe traded off some pieces here on g6, like you'll see in the continuation of the game by Magnus Carlsen. Here again, this f6 move wouldn't be good, because then the g6 would be hanging. So that's now the main idea here by Magnus Carlsen. The positional trade of pieces to simply create an outpost, just because, as I said, we have really sort of a static position here. So I also liked to hear the answer by Unnamed Channel, who also wrote here, my bishop on d3 can eat the knight on g6 to mess up black's pawns on the king's side and remove pressure from the bishop on f4. If f pawn takes my bishop, there is an outpost on e5 for my knight. Very well said. This frees my f pawn to kick back the black knight eyeing on for e4. And we have also this viewer who also wrote very nice, ITMND man. I don't know how to read it, but okay. The potential piece exchanges could lead to tactics like bishop on g6, bishop to f4, and then maybe create an outpost. So you see, both of these viewers recognize this potential trade of pieces like a strategical element in the middle game. And let's see now how Magnus Carlsen continued here in the game. So Magnus Carlsen plays as simply bishop on g6, h takes g6, and now bishop takes on d6. Now queen on d6, knight on e5. If knight on e4, you see again we can maybe take out this knight, still continuing the game with a blocked out bishop, because this pawn would be also on the light square, and again the bishop would be blocked out by its own pawn. So here g5 was played, and now f4, simply improving the position of the knight, fixing the knight really on this e5 outpost. Again, I'm pointing you out a potential f6 move, because we have now this weakened pawn structure around the king. Is not possible because knight on g6 can be followed, then maybe queen on h5 with some checkmate, right? So as said, whenever your opponent has weakened your king side with moves as g6, maybe here h6, or maybe we have here sort of a trade of pieces, h takes g6, it's basically unstoppable here for the pawns to kick away this knight from e5, and that's how you should really memorize this types of pawn structures. As said, when your opponent didn't create weakness, then only he can kick away your knight with the move f6. But still, we can, after f6, maybe try queen on h5 ideas. But as I'm pointing you just out, that here this f6 move would be possible. So let's see now the continuation of the game. Here g takes f4 was played, and now rook on f1. Very nice idea, because if you play f takes e3, then you get rook takes on f6. After g takes on f6, we can play queen on g4, king on h7 has to play, but now rook on f1. If you try this, then we can simply play, and here it would be also a very annoying checkmate. You're basically forced to give up your queen, because there's no way to prevent this queen and rook from checkmating you. So that's why here, after g takes f4 and rook on f1, knight on d7 was played in order to challenge the knight, but now queen on h5. And again, here a potential g6 move would be really deadly, because we have some tactics with the knight on g6. Again, I'm pointing you out because of the weakened pawn structure, f6 is not possible. Here, if the knight takes now immediately, then again we can take with the d pawn, then push maybe e takes f4, and then creating a pawn storm against black's king. So knight on f6, we have queen on h4, we have queen on d8, and now rook takes on f4. Again, I'm pointing you also out that this bishop is really paralyzed by its own pawn, because of the staticity of this pawn on d5. As said, a potential trade of the pawns on d4 after e takes d4 or c takes d4 really doesn't improve the position of the light square bishop. So knight on e4 was played. Now finally black tries also an outpost. We have knight takes, queen takes, and now rook takes on h4, and now d takes e4. So here d takes c5, b takes c5, but now the rook comes into the game very actively with an attack on the bishop, so that's why rook on b8 was played. Now b3, really creating sort of a healthy pawn structure here on the queen side. a5 was played, and now rook on c7. We have a4. This was sort of idea by black to maybe ever create a weakened pawn structure with some isolated pawns, but here Carlsen simply took b takes a4. Here bishop on a8 was played. Now simply pushing forward a5, we have rook on b7, and now rook takes on c5, another pawn, rook on a7, and now knight on c4. In this position in this position, black simply resigned, because we have also now this weakness. We have now three pass pawns here on the queen side, although black has here the position 4 on 3, but it's here really hard to create a pass pawn. Black will need many moves in order to create a pass pawn situation here. So as said, here in this position black resigned. But okay, I'm just pointing you out that we had this idea in the middle game, that we created this positional exchange of pieces, because we realized this static center position, because we saw that we cannot move, we couldn't move pawns in order to make some progress in the game. Let's go back. This is the most important thing, because here if you try some pawn moves, that could really weaken your position, because if you try g4, it doesn't help you so much, kingside attack. If you try c4, like I said, you will open up the position for the light square bishop. If you play maybe something like b4, of course you're risking, of course it has to be prepared, but you're risking some c4 moves, creating some space advantage on the fourth rank for black. So as said, here you shouldn't really try to make progress by moving pawns. Here positional trade of pieces, I think, is perfectly fine. Okay, at the end of the video we have now the next position for you to analyze at home. It's a game played by Eduard Bakhmatov against Eshan Gaem Magami. Here Magami with the black pieces, and here I would also for you to like for you to answer to all of these questions. Again, what kind of a pawn structure you have in all of these 7 questions, and try to maybe try to see your advantages in these positions, and try to find the best continuation as black. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this video. Meanwhile, you can watch my other producing ideas videos from the series, and you can also watch my basics in chess series, in which I show you opening principles, middle game strategies, and the endgame strategies. And you can also watch my chess tactics and chess puzzle series if you want to improve your tactical skills in the middle game. And you can also subscribe to my channel. Thanks you for watching, guys, and chess is the best, of course.